Welcome to the Mindflick Podcast. The Mindflick Podcast explores the psychology of high performance, focusing on the mindset shifts, leadership decisions, and personal turning points that shape how people think, lead, and grow. I'm Sir Andrew Strauss, Chairman of Mindflick.
And I'm Pete Lindsay, performance psychologist and co-founder at Mindflick. And we'll be taking you inside the mindset shifts that have shaped some of the best minds in both sport and business. And we'll blend that thought leadership with real life stories, bringing performance psychology to life in a way that's practical, human, and impactful.
Every episode, we will sit down with leaders, athletes, and change makers to uncover the turning points, the pressure moments, and the crucial experiences that define their journey. Joining us on today's show is Penny Hughes. Penny has had an extraordinary experience as both an executive at Coca-Cola and as a non-executive in some of the biggest businesses in the UK. She has a fascinating story to tell. I was lucky enough to meet Penny as part of the English Cricket High Performance Review, where she sat and gave an extraordinary differing perspective to high performance from the other people that were all embroiled in the world of sport. She is a very wise lady. She's an extraordinarily experienced lady and a very erudite one as well.
And you know what, Strauss, I think this episode is a fantastic kind of journey through both her career, but also her decision-making at some critical points in very high-profile British kind of corporate moments. I loved how she connected this idea of kind of making brave decisions with a sense of purpose. You know, why she was doing this, whether that be in the Body Shop or whether it be in RBS or in other contexts. So I think the listeners are in for a fantastic experience with this one.
Well, Penny, a very, very warm welcome to the Mindflick podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. And I've got to say, I feel sort of somewhat intimidated to have you on the show, given the length and breadth of your CV. You are definitely one of those people that make you feel very insignificant and small in life. But a real pleasure to have you on. Just to start off, Penny, what are you best known for and what are you doing with your time now?
Well, Andrew, nice to be on the show, and I'm not going to allow that introduction, so it's an honour to meet with you as well and be alongside you. So look, I guess I'm best known as the lady who ran the Coca-Cola company, who then decided to have children and do a plural career, and I've been doing that now for about 35 years. So it's been a fun, long career, and I feel lucky to have just been able to do what I feel I can make a difference in.
Fantastic. As you know, this podcast is all about these turning points, these sort of inflection points in your life, those sliding doors moments that make you see the world in a different way, et cetera, et cetera. And so why don't we just get straight in there, Penny, and why don't you describe your first turning point for us?
Well, my platform for my career really was the Coca-Cola company, 10 years in total, and the last 3 years running Great Britain and Ireland. I was the first woman that had become a president of a region for the Coca-Cola company, and by some distance the youngest. I think I was 28 at the time, and most of my peers were well into their 40s and 50s. And so that was quite daunting, really. But obviously I was working in a company that trusted me and really decided that I could make the difference, so I could reach this role. I guess I was lucky because the company was the most admired company in the world for 3 years in a row when I was president of Great Britain and Ireland. I mean, as you know, Andrew, if you're part of a winning team, it makes it a little easier to be a winner yourself. So this was really a foundation experience for me about what it means to really work in a company that is absolutely on its a triple star game.
An amazing challenge, but also a very intimidating one, I would have thought, given your age and relative lack of experience. I mean, was there a bit of sort of imposter syndrome there? You know, am I good enough? Am I going to be able to deliver what they need me to deliver for the business?
You know, at the time, no, because I guess I just felt confident that I knew what I was doing and I was going to give it a heck of a good go. I look back now and think, my goodness, how did I do that at 28? Because, you know, am I giving that opportunity to other 28-year-olds today? It's a big step. But, one of the things the company taught me, I'm a marketeer by background. I tend to be, in football terms, the centre forward. And my boss at the time, we were just going through a session. He said, Penny, you're the best centre forward I've ever worked with, but I need you to play centre back. and I think I've been learning how to play centre back since then, which is to be able to be both in attack and defence and see the world both from an opportunity, but also from a risk perspective. And so that really equipped me, I think, to take on that responsibility with some courage.
That adapting of your role from centre forward to centre back, if you like. So often to adapt, we have to challenge something that we previously held to be true, and question it and that, reinforce that or challenge it with new information. Like what were the beliefs that you changed in making that shift?
That you couldn't always go forward. You did sometimes have to kind of stop, adapt, manage a team, have different characters in the team that could help you understand where the risks were, where the pitfalls were. And that actually you needed to give them as much credibility and time and listen to them as much as you did people like you who wanted to put the ball in the net and wanted to win all the time. And you can't win all the time. You have to find different ways of winning. And so it really taught me about valuing different ways to think about the same problem.
Interested to just get a feel for the culture at Coca-Cola, because you always have these sort of perceptions, one of the biggest companies in the world. Everyone says it has a very strong identity and culture. And from what you said, it was a very strong team environment. And I suppose when you are put in those sort of positions, to know that you've got that culture, that environment around you, that support around you is crucially important. Do you just want to sort of just talk a little bit about what makes the Coca-Cola company so unique?
So during my time, we had an extraordinary CEO, Don Keogh, and just the clarity and warmth of his leadership allowed you to know what was important and to know that you were trusted to deliver. The company worked on the 3 A's strategy: make our brands more available, more acceptable, more affordable. I mean, that was as simple as it comes. And more than 1 million people could write their job objectives on that strategy. And so we had a common language, we had a common understanding of what success looks like. And then we just all played our part. And so it really was easy to know how to take decisions. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So during my time running Coke in the UK, the Berlin Wall came down. And the first thing that went across the Berlin Wall was a bottle of Coke. And Coke hadn't been much in Eastern Europe. That had mainly been Pepsi. And so we all understood this was a moment to refresh the world behind the Iron Curtain. And so it was an easy decision for those of us close to Germany and East Germany to decide that actually all of our best resources we needed to shift straight away to go and win in Eastern Europe. So some of my best people, some of my advertising dollars, some of my returnable bottles, everything went. And my task was to make sure that my business didn't suffer as a consequence of making sure that we won in a different part of the world. And actually, you get as much joy from seeing success somewhere else, knowing that you've played your part, as success, in your own business. So then also came along a really difficult moment where I became aware that one of our major customers, Sainsbury, was doing an own label cola with a can that looked like Coca-Cola. So before Atlanta had woken up, as soon as I knew that this was happening, I put legal injunction on one of my largest customers to stop them being able to roll out a look-alike cola in the same color, the same script, and so forth. Now, of course, Atlanta wakes up and thinks, goodness, Penny, what have you done? That's one of our major customers. But fortunately, the CEO kind of rang me up and said, brilliant. That protects the brand, and that's what we live for. And actually, I had the courage to do that because I knew that was the right thing to do. So when you're in that kind of environment, you are empowered to do the right thing. And it's really clear what the right thing is.
Brilliant. Well, look, I mean, that is an extraordinary success story, very young in your career. Probably a good time to talk about turning point number 2.
Yeah. So look, as I'm sure you can tell, I loved my time at the Coca-Cola Company, but Great Britain and Ireland was actually already the fourth largest region. There was only Japan, US and Germany that were bigger regions. And they weren't going to give a British woman age 32 any of those sort of regions. And so I was destined for Atlanta. And I love the US, and I haven't lived, but I've worked extensively in the US, and I love the American culture. But Atlanta and the sort of 28th floor at that age just wasn't for me. Husband and I were starting a family. And so I decided that was a good moment to see what else I could do that gave me more flexibility. And they were generous, very generous. They said you can start with a non-exec role before you leave the company, but obviously it can't be a customer. Well, that's hard because, Coca-Cola is distributed everywhere. But lo and behold, Anita Roddick asked me to join the Body Shop board. So I did that alongside my role at the Coca-Cola company. And I have to say, it's that experience that then gave me the confidence that this was now the next stage of my career that I could really enjoy. I could really make a difference in a different way. I didn't have to run the business. I could still make enough difference and use my experience and obviously get my own satisfaction from it and do so in different markets in different ways. And so I just haven't looked back from that. I owe Anita a lot because, of course, there was so much in common between Coca-Cola and Body Shop, being consumer brands, franchise, global, teenage brands. But clearly there was so much different as well. And Anita was famous as the Queen of Green. And I'm talking now 30 years ago, we were running campaigns on Greenpeace, Stop the Burning around the rainforest. She was just an extraordinary champion of causes. And I traveled to Kathmandu with Anita. We sourced our Christmas wrapping paper. It's actually banana leaves, which have been sort of hand painted and dried in Kathmandu. And literally out of the small change in my pocket and in Anita's pocket, we created the Anita and Penny School that still exists in Kathmandu. And you do things like that and you realize there is so much more to life and more purpose that you can bring in all walks of life. So Anita taught me an enormous amount about profit with principles, and that conscience has just never left me.
And a lot of people talk about sort of profit with purpose and that sort of thing. And I suppose it's a nice little tagline, isn't it? But it's about, to what extent do businesses and people actually live that? And you get the sense from the outside that Anita was, if you cut her in half, it would be very consistent all the way through her body and her DNA.
Completely. Business wasn't always great. And at some stage we had to let people go. And I've never seen a sort of restructuring done in such a fair and motivating manner. So by the time colleagues were leaving us, I remember we'd go down to the front door, they were all in the hallway, and we, the people who were staying in the company, were cheering them on in terms of leaving the company and starting their next life. And she gave them all a chance to be interviewed by her. If they had entrepreneur ideas, she would back it. I mean, it just went through every vein in her body. I was the first non-exec of the Body Shop. And so I was the first sort of corporate person that she'd really got to know and got to work with. I felt very lucky about that because we'd visit stores and she would see things that she wanted to do different and better. And I would see things around levels of stock, whether the stores were clean, whether the rota was well run. And between us, we were quite a team. You can imagine there I was still with my Coca-Cola job, doing this alongside. And it did give me the confidence that I could leave the Coca-Cola company and actually make a difference in a different way. And so I owe her a lot.
Interested to sort of get an understanding of that very different demands on the role, I suppose, from an executive Coca-Cola when you're right in the middle of it day in, day out, to that non-executive, more advisory, not having the control that perhaps you're used to. Did you find that a difficult switch to make from one to the other? Were there strengths that you have that really came to the fore in that first non-exec role? Because obviously you've gone on and done so many since then. Was it a bit of a learning experience for you?
Yes, there was a learning experience. And also, this was not a company that really had a board. And so things like performance reporting wasn't in place. And so there were some things that I could just naturally and easily ask for and help craft. I suppose I've got better over the years. But look, if something needs doing, then I don't rest, even if I'm a non-exec. And so I think it is knowing about when to step in, what to know, who to know, how much to be engaged. I don't miss the control aspects. I suppose that's not whatever drove me. I actually quite enjoy the fact that I don't now have people who I'm responsible for 24/7. That is a huge responsibility to be a people leader. And I feel as though I kind of put all of that energy into bringing up the kids. So it's more about my brain, and I hope my experience. And then I suppose just my ability to spot some things that I can make a difference in and do it in a way that adds value to the companies that I work with.
Penny, can I just follow up on Andrew's question there? You talked about some of those strengths you brought from Coca-Cola, but also the differences in culture, the differences in the two organisations. At Mindflick, we often talk about any strength overplayed can become a weakness for you. Were there any strengths that you had to manage when you came into this different role, into working as a non-exec?
I enjoy motivating people. And so I just have to be careful that I'm a mentor to lots and lots of people. So I have to be careful I don't undermine leadership in any way by having a strength of a relationship where actually that relationship should point to the executives. But I'm conscious of that. And also, there's only so much time in the day. So I've kept myself busy by doing plural things.
Hi there. Hope you're enjoying the episode. We know people power performance. When you unlock their potential, everything changes. That's why we built Mindflick, a SaaS solution where performance psychology meets innovative technology. Trusted by the best in sport and business, Mindflick transforms self-awareness into high-impact performance. We give you the tools to move from insight to action, creating results you can measure. If you're ready to elevate your leaders, empower your teams, and fuel your organization's growth, find out more at mindflick.co.uk and start your journey today. Now, back to the episode.
Great. So we've got that move, I suppose, that initial move from the executive world into the non-exec, and what an extraordinary foundation and starting point at the Body Shop. But then obviously since then, Penny, you've gone to do so many different non-exec roles. What's turning point number 3 for you?
Well, I think it's Vodafone. So Ian McLaurin was chairman of Vodafone. He'd been my largest customer when he was chief exec of Tesco when I ran Coke. And he rang me and he said, Penny, I'm really not sure, but I think this thing that we call a handset in the car might become a consumer phenomena. And I have lots of engineers and accountants on my board, but I don't have any marketeers. So why don't you come along? I joined Vodafone. They had less than 1 million customers. In the 8 years that I was there, we went over 100 million customers. So, I mean, just extraordinary growth. We were FTSE 100 when I first met Ian and FTSE 1 by the end. So, I mean, just unlike anything else, I think, at the time, in terms of sheer growth in scale and size and capability. It was game-changing technology. I mean, mobile telephony has changed everything we do. And the beauty of mobile telephony is it was probably almost more important to the developing world, you know, how farmers communicate, how they receive their weather forecasts, etc., than it is necessarily to the developed world. So it really was a piece of tech that has changed the way everyone on the planet thinks about how we communicate and how we do work and how we live. And so to be a chance of being part of that was truly special, truly special. It was also a game of very high stakes. Governments were selling airwaves. You know, we had to game which package did we want and how were we going to go about winning it. And obviously we went on a huge M&A run, probably the largest. I'm not sure if largest ever, but largest certainly of its time. And so these were really high stakes, big decisions taken rapidly, one after the other, to create from really entrepreneurs. So, you know, Chris Gent, who was chief exec, was, I think, the 3rd or 4th employee of Vodafone. And he was chief exec all the way through that long journey of taking it to a global champion housed in the UK. Extraordinary. To be able to be part of that was very special. And just have that single-mindedness that this was important technology And we only had one chance to get it right in terms of bidding for companies, bidding for airwaves, and putting it all together.
I love that idea of kind of that entrepreneurial spirit that's, there is at the beginning of this journey. And often as businesses kind of mature, some of that gets lost along the way. Was there a desire to maintain some of that spirit? And was that possible as the business matured?
Yes, because both the operations director and the finance director were also, amongst the top 10 employees of Vodafone. And so that specialness, that knowledge of the business, that expertise never changed and never veered. And actually, it's, if you look at my career, I've done a lot of founder businesses because they are so special. Obviously Body Shop, Morrison's, The Gap, working with the Fisher family that created The Gap. And obviously I put Vodafone in there, not because it was entrepreneurs that created, the sort of original airwaves and so forth, but entrepreneurs that made the company, really made the company. And so extraordinary to be able to support that consistency of culture and that consistency of direction such that you really do know what right and success looks like.
Interested to think about, when you look back at it now, it's obviously an extraordinary success story, that period at Vodafone. I'm just wondering, when you were in it, did it feel like that? Did it feel like you were in the zone, that you were on this extraordinary run? Or was it always a feeling of like, we've done well, but something might come around the corner and sort of devalue and knock us off? What was the sort of atmosphere and environment like in those days?
We were pretty confident, but we were also very conscious this is new tech. So, is there going to be another new tech that might knock you off and be the alternative to mobile telephony? I think because we were really running the company so fast and with support of shareholders through shares, we got to a point, and I think the City of London, really was supportive. And we got to a point where actually it was quite hard for anyone else to do what we were doing. And so then we managed to sweep up assets from Germany, from France, from Italy, because actually that game wasn't available to the incumbents in those countries. I don't think we started to say, right, we're going to go from here to there, because it would have been a sort of outrageous vision, but was clearly the right thing to do.
The other thing that just sprung to my mind there is these are big businesses that are making big decisions. They're all over the pages of the FT, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's, I suppose, very, very easy to get sort of personally involved. But then, of course, in a non-exec role, you are then also having to step back and probably at some point move on as well. Now, how did you sort of manage that?
As a non-exec, corporate governance rules say that you shouldn't be on any board for more than 9 years. I've actually never butted up against that because I think 5 or 6, you've probably given what you've got to give. And you are then becoming more part of the furniture. And you are then so invested in thinking what you're doing is right. It's then hard to bring independence. So I have stayed 7 or 8 years in a couple of places, but never 9. And I think you do have to know that, you've given what you've got to bring. And both for your own personal refreshment, but also for the businesses, you need to know when the time to go is as well.
Okay, so we've had some extraordinary successes, both your personal one at Coca-Cola and then Vodafone and the Body Shop. And then I suppose your next turning point is a slightly different challenge in itself.
Yes. So I kind of decided after all of the M&A we'd done at Vodafone that I really did need to understand banking a bit better. And so my first role was with Skandinaviska and Skuldebanken in Sweden, a North European bank, very well run. I always say if I could be born again, I'd be born Swedish. They seem to just have sorted so much in life, and the culture of the business, the culture of the company, the kind of quality of the people really motivated me. But that then gave me the experience when the global financial crisis happened and Royal Bank of Scotland was bailed out and needed to put a new board together. I was asked if I would join the board. And, this was after Fred Goodwin. It was the most unpopular job you could ever have. I was Chair of Remuneration. And so actually, I thought by then that I did have the experience to do it. I had enough banking knowledge. I certainly had enough knowledge of global businesses, of large, complex organizations. And I also felt personally that, Royal Bank of Scotland, NatWest could and should be a British champion, was fundamentally important to the economy of the UK. And if I could make a difference, then I really should give it a go. And I think it's the first time in my career where, we knew as a board, and a very strong board, very capable, we knew as a board that nobody would ever thank us for the work we'd done. And that didn't matter to us at all because we knew the quality of the work that we were doing. So we took the balance sheet down or the management team took the balance sheet down from 2 trillion to 500 billion, which is really unpicking a bank is really hard and complex work. I think the first year we had over 100 board meetings. There was a lot of stress, the regulators all over us, me trying to pay people bonuses, a lot of public commentary around that. But if you want skilled work, you need skilled colleagues. And so, we worked with great resilience, great togetherness. I'm hugely proud now of the bank that NatWest is, very important UK bank, mortgages, loans to the businesses in the UK, a fundamental part of the economic strength of the UK. It's rough when you read, that the business that you're supporting is hated by so many people for so long. But I could understand why. I mean, AGMs were very difficult. Lots of people with stories about how they'd lost money through the global financial crisis, through some of the loans that the bank had offered. And so the commitment the board had to really resolve all of that and get a good bank out the end of it really was what kept us going and kept us motivated.
So Penny, we often talk about resilience in sport and that need to sort of bounce back, if you like, but that's often after the event. But during the event, there's typically a cost to the setback and maybe a personal cost. I'm just wondering, what was the personal cost to you as you were going through that journey with the bank?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's never great when you read about either yourself or the company that you're representing in a manner which is, unpleasant. Turning up to AGM's difficult. But, we had a spirit, we had determination, and we also had an understanding that the bank had made mistakes before we'd arrived. It should never have been the size and scale it was. And so putting those right, and honestly, the management team that ran the bank, made some very, very brave decisions. And so as a board, we just really supported one another through some quite difficult days, quite difficult regulatory meetings, quite difficult, press and other commentary, because we knew that actually the most important thing was recovering the bank and allowing NatWest to emerge as a strong part of the UK economy.
And I guess there's not just an MBA's worth of knowledge that came out of this experience. There's multiple MBAs, but if there was a kind of, course of study or a series of lessons that you took from that very unique experience, what would some of those be?
I talked earlier about learning to be a centre-back. Oh, my God, I was goalie too by now because I was on the risk committee. And so, you just have to think ahead about what are the circumstances under which this decision might not be the right one? And in which case, how do we adapt? How do we mitigate for that? And so it really taught me to look round corners and not just assume that you could put the ball in the net.
The whole experience seems very relatable to me. I suppose, in my mind, I'm thinking about times when, as part of the England cricket team, you're playing poorly, the media on your case, there's all sorts of speculation about who should be playing and who should be dropped, etc., etc. And one of the things we always talk about in sport is you only really understand how good a team you are when you're losing, because basically in that situation, people either turn inwards and go, we're in this together and we're going to get through this together, or they start turning outwards and going, I'm going to look after myself here and make sure that it's not my head on the chopping block, so to speak. That's a self-protection mode. I mean, it obviously sounds like the executive team did a very good job of keeping that team together. But were there times or were there people who you sort of had the sense were sort of going into that self-protection mode?
We worked very hard as a board not to let that happen. We really did, because we knew that we could solve this together, but that if we were in silos, that it really would not work. And so how you choose your top team, how you motivate your top team, how you reward your top team was also on people's contribution and willingness to be part of a healthy culture. And so the ability to bring up difficult problems, to surface them, to not hide things, not be working in a silo, to not compete with one another. We had to trust one another and then get motivation by being a part of and able to support one another. just be a team. Just be a team.
What about the role of the media in all of this? I mean, I'm just thinking back to those times with England Cricket Team, and even when I was working in the ECB, where you sort of feel like the media aren't giving you a fair crack of the whip, and that they've got a story that they are determined to tell, regardless of whether the evidence is pointing them in another direction. You can get quite bitter and twisted about that. I tended to feel like it was a really important thing for us just to focus in on what we're doing and not allow the media to be either a source of frustration or motivation, actually. Other people thought very differently. Some people thought you actually need to sort of feed off that, almost have that sort of enemy at the gates feel to sort of create a sort of a siege mentality. How did they deal with it in that environment?
Some people did, obviously, particularly for the executive team who took more personal knocks. It was hard for them to feel other than hounded by the press. Look, for me, I didn't even do history O level. So, of course, I learned from my mistakes. I learned from the past. But I'm only really interested in the future. I'm only really interested in what I can create going forwards. I mean, I remember it was actually on the Vodafone board, one of the very significant directors said to Chris Gent, who was also taking some flack from the press, he just said, hey, today it's fish and chip paper, get on with it. And that is, I suppose, the way I've always looked at it, which is, everyone's allowed a point of view, but actually I've got an inside seat. And so what's more important is that I do the best I can from my inside seat.
It's an extraordinary story, this, Penny. It really is.
No, it's not.
To be involved in such extraordinary, momentous periods in these businesses that we all know about and have all heard about. It's an extraordinary thing you've done. But you have got one final turning point for us. So hit us with it.
Well, so I became chair of Aston Martin at the time of listing. I'd taken lots of advice from bankers, lawyers, accountants, and they all cited the fact that Ferrari had listed very successfully in New York, and there was no reason why Aston Martin shouldn't list successfully in London. But really quite soon after listing, it became clear that the targets that had been set for the company's performance were not going to be met. There was obviously the journey to EV, which was going to be very costly for a company in the motor industry. Aston had already committed really significant sums of money for a new plant in South Wales for the DBX, a beautiful car. But of course, opening a new factory does strain the balance sheet of a company. And so the company became financially distressed really quite quickly. We had COVID on the doorstep too. So at that time, you really do have to think, well, what matters now? What's important? What's my responsibility? And of course, your responsibility is to shareholders and to all other stakeholders. But bugging me was the fact that really Aston Martin is at the heart of Motorsport Valley, which is all the expertise that sits in the East Midlands. And to allow a company like Aston Martin to fail would fail the whole of that engineering expertise that the UK and particularly Motorsport Valley Midlands is so well known for. So it was obvious we had to put the business into bigger and better hands. And really, we had two options. We either had Geely, the Chinese, or we had Lawrence Stroll and his investment in Formula One and his willingness to personally invest significantly in Aston Martin and putting the Formula One team and Aston Martin together. And of course, you don't know what's going to happen because, you are taking a judgment at the time. But you might imagine that Geely would be more interested in converting Aston Martin to a lower price brand made out of China. And really the Aston Martin that the UK has built and all the expertise that the UK has put in there would be lost. Whereas it was enormously clear that Lawrence was hugely invested in Formula One and understood luxury brands, that actually this was the right choice. And actually, I had to do a deal between Geely or Lawrence, and I had to do it quite quickly. And I remember calling Lawrence, and it was just when the Australian Formula One had just been called off because of COVID. And there was me on the phone saying, Lawrence, I've sent you the contract. You need to sign and need to send over the money to save the company. And bless him, he was nothing but brilliant with me because he understood, as I did, that this was a kind of game-changing move for the company. And so to be able to save both the company in its expertise and in its place and in its engineering and put it together with a Formula One team was the right answer. Now, Did shareholders take a knock? Absolutely. Was this IPO a success? No, one of the worst in the UK. But did the right outcome happen at the end? Yes. And is that what's important? Yes. And so that was much more stressful than I anticipated it would be. Here was a beautiful brand that I thought I could continue to add value to. And in fact, I had to do really quite difficult, chunky lifting to save the company. But actually, again, a bit like RBS, you know that you're doing the right thing. And that's what gives you the motivation and, frankly, the courage to deal with someone as significant as Lawrence and get a deal done at the most stressful time of his Formula One career.
It's really interesting when you kind of make, you make big decisions like that, we make big calls. Sometimes it's obviously the right call, sometimes it's a bit more in the balance. And I remember Andrew and I had a chat a few years ago around a big decision. And Andrew said to me, often it's what you do after the decision that determines if it's a good one or not. You can make the best decision, then kind of mess it up with what you do next, and vice versa. Like, what was it that you did after that decision that allowed it to make sure it was the right course of action?
I had a board which had investors on it, independent directors on it, and obviously, they were concerned for the success of the company. They were not all necessarily aligned to the decision we needed to take. And so I then had to spend a lot of time with my board to make sure that we were all on the same page and that this was, the decision that we needed to take. Part of Lawrence coming on board was to actually replace me as chair. Kindly, he asked me would I stay on for a while he organised himself and found time. And so, of course, I was willing to do that because, he was someone who had the opportunity to make the difference to the company. And all I was interested in is making sure that he landed well.
How did you deal with that personally? I mean, was that something you found able to sort of take in your stride, or was it just very hard personally to go through that?
I would say this was possibly the most stressful moment in my career because it was probably the only time where I was genuinely leading multiple stakeholders who were all somewhat in different places. And we didn't have much time. And so I had to work really very quickly. But again, Lawrence Stroll was very easy to work with. He's a big player. So he said, Penny, I have one banker and I have one lawyer and we do the deal together. And I said, great, I'll do the same. It was stressful. I've kept the sort of few hundred texts that I had with Lawrence during that period. You never know when you need them, but they're a source of pride and a source of motivation, really, that actually that was me. That's what I did. And it did require some courage. But of course, I would never have been able to do that, 20 years ago. It's only having all of this sort of, it's a set of circumstances that enables you to know when you need to step in and be the difference.
In each of the examples that you've given, each of those turning points, you've spoken about being courageous and whether you felt it at the time or not. And also there's that link between making courageous decisions and a sense of purpose, like a strong reason why we're doing what we're doing. Like, have you got any further thoughts on that?
I think, life's too short to do things you don't enjoy or you don't understand the purpose for. And so I think, that's what's driven me. As I say, I move on from places where I think I've given all I can give. But I think, when I talk to, kids' friends about what they should do, where their career should be, I'm not passing on, worldly advice. I'm really saying find something you're good at, that you enjoy, and that you can go home at night and feel good about yourself, that actually you made a difference. And you made a difference on something that's kind of we can all understand. They're good purpose businesses. And so that's really the advice I give to most people. Find the sweet spot for you.
Just one further question on that Aston Martin experience. One of the things that I found interesting is when I retired from playing cricket, I was so looking forward to not having the pressure and the stress and having to live with it day in, day out. I just thought about just not being kind of completely obsessed by what's happening in my batting technique, etc., etc. And my lived experience of that, obviously, was that within 2 weeks, that's what I missed the most, because, of course, that sort of stress and pressure was because you were doing something that was very purposeful for you, made you feel important. A lot of your self-identity was wrapped up in it. And of course, it made you feel alive. And I wonder whether that sort of Aston Martin experience had a similar effect for you. Like that, it was pressureful, it was very stressful, but you probably felt like you were doing something really important at the time.
Agreed. I did. I mean, fortunately, I always do 4 or 5 things at the same time. And so I've always got something that's new in my life and something that I've been doing for a while. You find your motivation in different ways. And so I'm running a retirement living business right now called Riverstone. Property markets are quite difficult, but this is a truly purposeful organization that's creating, the best later living in London. And so you just move from having that, intense experience in one place to putting your energy into another.
Penny, thank you so much for sharing those turning points with us. I know that there's so many other experiences you've had in various board rooms over the years. I dread to think how many board papers you've had to read, Penny. I'm feeling like War and Peace here. Thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into that. Certainly, I mean, fascinating stories, a fascinating career, no doubt a lot more to come still. We always finish just one final question for you, Penny, which is, and you may have touched on it already, but if there's one thing you'd want listeners to take away from your story, what would it be?
It is go where you're happiest. Life's too short. We're only at our best when we know, what true north is. And also, actually, that's a personal responsibility as well. Don't wait for someone else to help you find what true north is. Take it as your own responsibility to be the best you can be in the right place. And don't expect that to come on a plate. You need to work hard to find that.
Penny Hughes, thank you so much for coming on the Mindflick podcast.
My pleasure.